Yes, I am. I can see the polls, so I'm ready to launch those, and I'm sharing my screen.
Perfect.
All right, so if we can remind everyone to turn off any competing devices, cell phones are on airplane.
Okay, welcome everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. I do see that we have 26 of us here in attendance tonight. So we'll give just a couple of seconds to let a few more join. And again, you've joined us this evening for a project update on SR29 multimodal improvements through American Canyon. We'll get started in just a few moments. Okay. See, just a few more people joined, so we'll go ahead and get started this evening. And hello and welcome, and thank you for joining the SR29 Multimodal Improvements project through American Canyon, and thank you for your interest in the project. I'm Stacy Mueller from GHD, and I'll be hosting today's event. Simona Ramirez-Diaz, also from GHD, will assist in production and moderation of today's public information session. So as we are all likely adapting to new technology, I'd like to cover some items that you can expect while you view or listen to our event today. And we're hopeful that you'll also be able to be patient with us as we work diligently to bring this event to you. So first off, today's event is being recorded and it will be made available for future viewing. And secondly, you've joined us in Zoom's webinar platform. There will be a period during today's event when those of you who have joined us on the internet will be able to ask questions and share your comments through Q&A and raise hand features on your screen. We will share instructions on how to submit those questions just before the Q&A session and comment session begin. So please note that questions and comments that you submit today may be published for all attendees to view during today's event and may be made available to the public in future reports. So I'd like to share tonight's agenda. So we'll begin this evening with a bit of background and shared vision. We can go back one slide, please. Background and shared vision, you'll hear from Kate Miller and NVTA, as well as Jason Hawley and Erica Amon Smithies of City of American Canyon. And then you'll hear a technical presentation based on project needs and objectives with Lindsay Van Paris of GHD. And for our question and comment session this evening, we have representatives from NVTA, the City of American Canyon, GHD, and Caltrans, and we'll try to finish this evening close to 7:30. And I believe I'll run back through that. I believe our background and shared vision will have Kate Miller from NVTA and America Amon Smithies from City of American Canyon. And Jason's joined us today, so they may be sharing duties there. So a couple of things before we get started with our project update is we really want to make sure that we keep our commitment as participants. We want you to keep our meeting purpose in mind. We want you to recognize that you're likely to hear a wide range of diversity of perspectives this evening, and recognize that this isn't the last time that you'll hear about this project or have an opportunity to participate. There will be future opportunities for dialogue. And a reminder that we promote this as a respectful format for all attendees. So inappropriate language and any culturally insensitive remarks may be cause for dismissal from this evening's project update. So if you few reminders as you listen to our presenters this evening. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions using our Q&A feature. So we'll show you how to ask a question on our screen this evening. We'll raise 3 questions, or we will raise the questions to each of the presenters. We'll be publishing them. We'll acknowledge receipt of questions, and we will have members of our presenters and panel who will respond to your questions if you choose to type your question using the Q&A feature. So for attendees who've dialed in to the dial-in option, you'll also have an opportunity to ask questions, and we'll let you know how to do that during the question and comment session. But before you hear from our presenters today, we're going to invite you to participate in 2 poll questions to help us understand who's joined. So we're going to show these 2 questions on the screen, and then on your device, however you've joined us this evening, you should also see a pop-up on your screen. So if we can slide back to question 1. And question 1 is, where do you live? And we'll take a moment to read all of the options out to you. We want to know if you live in A, American Canyon, B, the city of Napa, C, Vallejo, D, somewhere else in Napa, or E, none of the above. And you're welcome to use the Q&A feature this evening to let us know where you've joined us from. We'll give just a few seconds for that poll question to pop up. And we'll share those results with you on your screen. See that most of you have responded and most of you are from American Canyon this evening. Our second question, question number 2. Question number 2 is, how did you hear about this evening's meeting? A, did you hear about it from the City of American Canyon? B, from NVTA? C, from social media? D, from a friend or a neighbor? And E, maybe you heard about it elsewhere. And again, you can share with us using the Q&A feature. And we'll share those results with you on the screen. It looks again like many of you heard about this evening's project update from the City of American Canyons. We're grateful for you to take the time. It's important for our presenters and our project team to know where our attendees are coming from this evening and how they've heard about our meeting. So at this time, I am going to let you know who our panelists are, or excuse me, who our presenters are this evening. So we do have from NVTA, Kate Miller, the executive director, and from the City of American Canyon, we have both Jason Hawley and Erica Amon Smithies. And from GHD, you'll be hearing from Lindsay Van Paris, the project manager. And at this time, I'll turn our information session over to Kate.
Thank you, Stacy. Good evening, and thank you for participating in today's meeting. I want to link the work that we've done in the past with the work we're doing now to give the community a better understanding about project development. In 2014, NVTA completed the State Route 29 Gateway Study. That plan summarized a high-level approach for State Route 29 between Minnie Drive and Vallejo to the north side of the city of Napa. Its intent was to look more at how we could improve traffic on the corridor and to ensure larger coordination with other planned work, both in Solano County and Napa County. We held a lot of community meetings and identified some big picture concepts, such as expanding the corridor to 6 lanes. These are included in the project initiation or PID document that is the subject of tonight's meeting. The second plan we completed was the State Route 29 multimodal corridor plan. This plan focused more on the section of State Route 29 from American Canyon Road to the Carneros Highway, and drilled down on ways to improve the corridor for bicyclists, pedestrians, transit users, as well as automobiles. A key focus included updating the gateway plan to ensure more current project designs were incorporated for Soscol Junction, which is the intersection of State Route 29 and State Route 221, Jameson Canyon and Airport, which is the intersection of State Route 12 and State Route 29, and the roadway in American Canyon. The plan also updated potential improvements to coincide with current trends and policies, and was a requirement to be eligible for Senate Bill 1 Solutions for Congested Corridor Funds. The multimodal corridor plan also updated project cost. The subject of tonight's community meeting is the project initiation document. The PID is a requirement of Caltrans and must be completed before we enter any pre-construction phases such as environmental studies and design. The PID will help refine the improvements in American Canyon and limit the project scope in part to reduce the overall cost of the project. Studying all the project options in the environmental and design phases would be extremely expensive and consume the scarce resources that we have for project improvements. Part of what limits the project scope is the anticipated funding available to make improvements. Caltrans in the recent past has focused on maintenance of California's highway infrastructure, and any improvements have come from local county funding or competitive funding. Recently, however, Caltrans has worked with county transportation planning agencies such as NVTA to use State Highway Operations and Protection Program or SHOP funds to make active transportation improvements along key corridors that also serve as local communities' main streets, such as Broadway in American Canyon. Recently, Caltrans committed almost $5 million to active transportation improvements on the Imola corridor in Napa between Soscol and Golden Gate. Caltrans and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, the regional planning agency where NVTA gets its highway funds, have made a number of policy changes over recent years, many of which will be detailed later on in the presentation. But much of the funding NVTA receives cannot be used for capacity or widening. Caltrans too has limited capacity projects because of the growing cost of maintenance, but also because Caltrans recognizes capacity contributes to longer term congestion and encourages driving, which is in conflict with Caltrans' recently adopted Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, or CAPTI. Finally, capacity improvements tend to be more expensive, and over time, their effectiveness erodes, and given funding constraints, especially in small counties like Napa, it doesn't pencil out from a benefit cost perspective. Safety is also getting a lot of attention at state, regional, and local levels. Improvements such as bicycle and pedestrian facilities and improving how transit riders are served on the corridor can significantly reduce the number of collisions in State Route 29 in American Canyon and improves the project's chances for funding in state and federal competitive programs. The next steps are to identify funding for the environmental and design phases. NVTA will receive $20 million in Regional Measure 3 bridge tolls for State Route 29 improvements if the current litigation is decided in MTC's favor. We will also look to Caltrans for SHOP funds to make bike and pedestrian improvements. We will seek competitive federal and state grant funds. There is a lot of favor in Washington to fund improvements on highways that also serve as main streets. There are also a number of Senate Bill 1 programs that are well suited for planned improvements on State Route 29. And NVTA is also considering changes to its sales tax and to use some of the funding for projects. This will be key for project development, as most of the grant programs are for construction only, but it will depend on Napa County's voters to support that effort. So once again, I want to thank you for participating in tonight's meeting, and I'll hand the program over to American City Manager Jason Hawley.
Thank you, Kate. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you, Kate, for that introduction. I'm actually currently on location here in Portland, Oregon, presenting American Canyon on a national stage at the City Manager Conference, talking about our sustainability efforts and sharing our community story with many other interested parties throughout the country. But this is such an important topic that I wanted to make sure I was available to at least provide some introduction. Our Public Works Director, Erica Smithies, will be with you for the remainder of the presentation to answer any questions that may come up. But I wanted to just share two important points beyond what Kate had already mentioned. The first of which is all of the alternatives that the folks will see tonight provide an exciting opportunity for multimodal improvements, in particular, bicycle and pedestrian improvements on both sides of Highway 29. The fact that you cannot walk, that American Canyon residents cannot walk north and south on the highway in a safe manner is really abhorrent at this point. Modern communities all have sidewalks and bicycle paths, and we really need to have these improvements on both sides of the highway. Really, safety is an issue, and all of these alternatives provide those pathways north and south on the highway. And so that's an exciting development as we look at projects moving forward. The second is the focus of tonight's presentation. This PID document is only focused on Highway 29 and doesn't include the full gamut of other things that the city is working on, in particular on the east side, the extension of Newell Drive as a parallel road to the highway. That work has begun in relation to the Watson Ranch project and will occur over in many phases as that project moves forward and as other projects like it move forward on the east side of American Canyon. And so while tonight's focus is on the highway, there are other projects that are moving forward, and wanted to make sure the residents in the community understood it wasn't only things that we were looking at on the highway. But again, all of the alternatives tonight include the bicycle and pedestrian pathways on the highway, and we're really excited to see the future information and these projects come forward. So again, thank you, and Erica can handle it the rest of the way. But it's great to see everyone. Thank you, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jason, and wonderful to hear that you're on the national stage. So good luck with your presentations there. Hello, everyone. I'm Lindsay Van Paris. I'm the project manager with GHD, who's been hired by NVTA to develop the alternatives and get through this first process. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about these various things. I'm going to go very high level and over it quickly to make sure that we have time to respond to your questions and your answers, and to your questions and provide you answers and give you the time that you deserve for getting into the details. So please make sure that you chat your questions at any time, or you can ask them live during Q&A. And I just wanted to verify that you can see my screen.
Hi, Lindsay, we can see your screen.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the purpose and need of the project and some of the objectives. So the project need, there's a lack of connectivity for all users. So we've got gaps in sidewalk closures, as you can see on the right-hand side there. We have some challenges with roadway connectivity, and there's a lack of low stress routing options. And low stress is a term that we engineers use for evaluating and looking at how a cyclist would feel on the road. And with the volume of traffic, the proximity to the moving traffic, and just the lack of facilities, there is a lack of a low stress routing options for cyclists, a lack of public transit access lanes, which leads to non-reliable transit in travel time, as far as travel time goes. So the travel time reliability is a challenge because of the operations, lack of aesthetic benefits, regional traffic congestion, and constraints at the intersection that lead to significant queuing and stacking and impact that congestion. So some of the objectives that have been set in the development of this project in particular is improving mobility for all users, improve safety for all users through Vision Zero. And that is something that Kate mentioned briefly at the beginning, talking about safety. So Vision Zero is a term that's been coined by the Federal Highway Administration and also a lot of other jurisdictions, including Caltrans, and that is the push to get to 0 deaths and 0 serious injuries on our roadway systems. And so that is, again, that critical focus on safety. Eliminate the overhead utility poles, which goes back to that aesthetics piece, and then further improving the overall corridor aesthetics, really making it a focal point and be the main street of American Canyon. Reduce vehicle miles traveled by encouraging transportation mode shift, so getting people out of their cars and using bikes or sidewalks to go run errands for lunch, or use transit and then bike and walk the rest of the way. Improve access to businesses along SR 29 and improve accessibility for all modes of transportation. Our project timeline and process. So there was this project identification and development phase, which Jason and Kate touched on with all of these prior plans. Now we're in the project initiation phase, where we have looked at some technical components and performed technical studies. Through those technical studies and understanding the needs and the project objectives and looking at ways that we could meet those, we did an alternative development. So looked at the various different alternatives that could potentially meet the purpose and need. And then we are here at the draft project study report. So that is where we have all of the kind of technical study, the preliminary technical studies done. We've identified the alternatives that can move on to the next phase. And then we'll move to the final project study report. Now, in the project study report, we are not rejecting alternatives. We're not recommending an alternative. We're just saying these are viable alternatives and can use and should have further evaluation. And so I'll talk about that further evaluation at the end of the process, which are the next steps. But we are at the draft project study report at this point. And now what has guided a lot of this and a lot of the change over the years, as you look at the different plans and the different plans that were presented by Kate and by Jason, a lot has changed since then. We're seeing a bunch of movement and different assembly bills, executive orders, Senate bills, Caltrans policy directives, Caltrans deputy directives, just a lot of movement and a lot of changes. The two that I want to highlight here, these are some of the recent policy changes that we have seen within the transportation world. And the two I want to point out are the Caltrans directive for the Complete Streets policy. So making our roads accessible to all users of all, or to users of all ages and abilities. And then Senate Bill SB 743, which is the reduction in vehicle miles traveled. And so what that means is reducing the number of miles that we are driving day to day. And that is really a result of the other policies that you see above. So the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, requiring circulation elements to accommodate all users, Senate Bill 375, reduce greenhouse gases through planning processes. So it's really just the next step in that. There's also been changes in our funding policy parameters too. And these here on the screen are just them that have shaped the way that we fund our transportation projects here in California, particularly one that Kate mentioned, which was CAPTI, or the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure. There's a link on this slide that you can capture on your screen if you're interested to learn more about that. But the two that I want to point out is this EO, our executive order, N7920 and CAPDI. And those are really the framework that establish how we can fund our projects and what types of projects will get funding. So projects that are capacity enhancing, that are increasing the amount of time cars will be on the road, or the number of cars that can use the facility, are not being put forward for funding. And as Kate said, that is one of the critical pieces, is building something and designing something that is fundable and implementable. And that is one of the items that we looked at here. So a deeper look at some of the design considerations. We always have to balance and provide balance, and you move the pendulum one way and one moves the other. I like to look at alternative development as a triangle. You're never going to find one that lies perfectly in the middle. It may lean a little one way or a little another, but it does ultimately fit within that triangle and meet the purpose and need. So we looked at balancing impacts to the community, as well as balancing technical and legal requirements. And so those are some of the technical and legal requirements, or the cost and funding requirements, design requirements, and the policy changes that we looked at. And then obviously technical feasibility. Can it be constructed? Can it be implemented? So some of the policy and engineering standards that play a particular important role in this project, and that we had to take into consideration during the development process, was, again, accommodating all road users, air quality and emissions, so that reduction in greenhouse gases. It is on State Route 29, so Caltrans design standards. Complete streets. So complete streets is a buzzword that we use in the transportation industry, which really just means a street that has a low stress environment that feels comfortable for everyone to use and can accommodate transit, bikes, pedestrians, cars, trucks, all of that, but does so in a way that makes it feel safe. So not just simply adding just a bike lane or a 4-foot sidewalk, but it's a little more involved than that. Environmental components, so all of our various environmental regulations. Equality and access, so making sure that as we're accommodating all users, we're doing so in an equitable way, and not just Americans with disabilities or ADA, but also taking into account other equity pieces, like providing transit, providing gap closures so people can use alternative modes of transportation. Again, the funding parameters, intersection control. That is another piece of what does the intersection look like, and meeting the policies there. Caltrans has an intersection control evaluation policy that we went through on this project, which requires us to look at signals, stop control, which is not applicable in this case, except on some of the side streets and in roundabouts. And then again, Vision Zero for safety. Then other design parameters that we looked at that are really specific to this corridor is, again, that part of that purpose and need, but access to local businesses, aesthetics, design vehicles. So can the big trucks that are going down there make it through our designs? Railroad requirements. There is a railroad running right adjacent to our improvements, and making sure that we're meeting the needs of those crossings. Right-of-way impacts. There is quite a bit of right-of-way out there today, but just making sure that we're taking into account any potential impacts the project may have. A shared use path, or a class 1 bikeway, based on the number of cars and the speeds on SR 29. We are required to put in a shared use path, which is a wider separated facility that is accessible by both bicycles and pedestrians. Transit accommodations, utility undergrounding. So all of those overhead lines being put underground, which will also tie back into that aesthetics, but also looking at what are the underground utilities? Are there big transmission lines down there that we can't impact, or different pieces like that? And then stormwater quality is also another key parameter. With any new transportation project, we have to treat the water that runs off the roadway before it gets discharged into our storm drain systems. Now, safety is a big push, and some of the safety statistics on SR 29 within our project area were surprising to me. May not be surprising to everyone, but the number of fatal and injury collisions were 2 times higher than the statewide average within the corridor, and 84% higher than the statewide average for total collisions. So safety was one of the really key parameters here to keep to reduce these number of fatal and injury collisions and property damage collisions as well. So let's take a quick look at the alternatives. So our project again spans SR 29 through American Canyon. So it starts at American Canyon Road and ends at Napa Junction Road. Some of the alternatives have some of the same characteristics, and so I will point those out. We've got a legend here which gives you a key to what the map below shows. But essentially, alternative 1 is providing multimodal improvements. So there is no adding of lanes. It is focused on the multimodal and transit improvements. So maintaining the 4 lanes, but reducing the lanes to 11 feet, which will help with speed control and speed reduction. And then also that will minimize impacts to right-of-way, providing a separated sidewalk/bikeway in both directions, taking out that landscape median and constructing a paved median with the potential to add aesthetic qualities in there. Widen the shoulders to 12 foot to allow for part-time bus on shoulder. Reconfigure and improve intersections along the corridor. So by reconfigure, they're not major reconfigurations, just adding in additional turning storage, adding in enhanced pedestrian improvements, and looking at the signal timing to revamp the signal timing to make it flow a bit better. And then construct a pedestrian overcrossing just south of Napa Junction Road. As we look here, this is a table with a lot of information. Essentially, we are looking at changing. I'll flip back here for these 2 columns, the existing and the proposed. Just flip back real quick. You can see we're proposing a new signal at American Canyon at Donaldson, or not a new, but an enhanced signal at American Canyon, Donaldson, Rio Del Mar, Eucalyptus, and Napa Junction. And then we're also providing these bus queue jumps at the signalized intersection. And what is a bus queue jump? It's essentially a red painted lane that is a bus priority lane, which allows the bus to jump past the line of waiting cars to get through the intersection. So that way we can help with that travel time reliability piece of the transit system. And then the enhanced crosswalk markings, every single crossing will improve the visibility of the crosswalks. That is also another opportunity to provide some aesthetic improvements as well, within just the look and feel of the roadway corridor. Alternative 2 is essentially alternative 1, but instead of signals, it's roundabouts, and it's a couple more roundabouts potentially. So American Canyon Road will remain signalized, and then the rest of the intersections will be converted to roundabouts. Again, it's 4 feet or 4 lanes in all direction, or 4-lane roadway, reducing the lane widths to 11 feet, providing the separated sidewalk and bikeway in both directions, constructing the paved median, widening the shoulder for part-time use of bus in between the roundabouts, constructing 6 roundabouts, and then constructing the pedestrian overcrossing as well. And putting in a bus queue jump where feasible. Right now, we have identified American Canyon to have the bus queue jump, and then potentially looking at converting one of the lanes to a bus only lane during certain peak hours. The roundabouts will be 6 lanes, so they will have an extra lane just through that circulating road, and I'll show you that a little bit later, and that is to enhance capacity, but it'll drop back down to 4 lanes after the roundabout and in between the intersections. Again, we're looking at enhanced crosswalk systems, shortened crossing distances, which is great because we're putting in median islands or pedestrian refuges. So pedestrians only cross portions of the road before, which improves operations, because when a pedestrian hits that signal, they have to cross the entire intersection, where with a roundabout, you only have to cross part of it. And we are also looking at putting in potential pedestrian signal or a beacon at the crosswalks to further enhance visibility and safety for all users. Alternative 3 is the multimodal improvements with lane additions. So essentially it's the same as alternative 1, but widened to have 1 additional lane in either direction on SR 29. And again, including the pedestrian undercrossing at Napa Junction. Now this one, again, when we go back to those funding parameters, the ability to obtain funding to do this is challenged. And so that is one thing that we have recommended to take into account in the next round of analysis, is that the ability to obtain the funds to construct this. Same things as alternative 1 with the queue jumps and the enhanced crosswalk markings and the grade separation. Now, looking at different parameters of these alternatives and comparing them side by side, this is looking at right-of-way. So all of them will require right-of-way acquisition, whether that be permanent and or temporary easements for construction. But alternative 1 are relatively minor along the corridor at the intersections to accommodate the new improvements. There will be right-of-way acquisitions required. And for alternative 2, a complete acquisition may be required for various pieces of land. And then alternative 3, a larger footprint needed, and there will be acquisition along the entire length of SR 29 on both sides of the roadway, which may impact access and parking as well. Now, looking at traffic operation comparisons. So looking at vehicle miles traveled, you'll see here we've got red, yellow, and green. Best, better, and marginal. So number 1 means it has the most positive advantages. 2 is better than where you are now, but not a significant improvement. And then 3 is marginal, marginal to no improvement or negative improvement. And so for the vehicle miles traveled, the 6-lane alternative would allow more capacity and would increase vehicle miles traveled, which is why it has the 3. Intersection level of service is something that we still look at, because you want to see what the queuing will be and how much stacking there will be along the roadway corridor, but it is not a consideration in the CEQA process or the environmental process, since the implementation of Senate Bill 743. But looking at those, you can see on the screen, alternative 1 has the most, is the most congested, where the roundabout alternative is the least congested. and then travel time. So that's the travel time reliability. If you were to start at one side and go to the other, what would that look like? And with the that travel time, we've got, again, alternative one performing at the worst level, alternative two being better, and alternative one is best. And why that is, even though the intersection level of service is better with the roundabout alternative, on the signal, the 6-lane signal alternative, if all lights were green, you could just go through and traffic would keep flowing, whereas the roundabout, you yield and then go. Travel speeds. So with the alternative one, you're looking at better, alternative two is best, and alternative three is marginal. Pedestrian crossing distances, same thing as I explained earlier. The 4-lane would remain as it is today. The 2-lane or the roundabout would have the best because we do divide that pedestrian crossing time, and the 6-lane we'd be adding a significant amount of crossing distance. Collision severity, the alternative one would be roughly the same as it is today. Alternative two would be the best. Roundabouts reduce the broadside and T-bone collisions and reduce collision severity significantly. They have an 80% reduction in overall collisions and around a 40% reduction in fatal and injury collisions. And then alternative three, as you add another lane to a signal, your number of conflict points increases for both pedestrians or both non-motorized users and motorized users. So that increases the risk for all roadway users in collision severity. A peek at our different intersections. So this is American Canyon Road. Alternatives 1 and 2 are the same. And this is where we are tying into existing infrastructure. So we will be ending the improvements as we approach here. The black lines are the proposed improvements. You can see the intersection control type will be denoted by either a signal image or a roundabout sign or stop sign image. These red lanes are the best queue jumps. And this just shows what a potential example enhanced crosswalk would look like. The green is the bike crossing and the black would be the pedestrian crossing. This shows Crawford Way. So in alternatives 1 and 3 would be a stop sign, Alternative 2, we were looking at potentially adding in a roundabout here, keeping it at 2 lanes through. Then at Donaldson, alternative 1 is our, we've got the enhanced crosswalks on 3 legs, and then the bus queue jumps on both sides of the SR29. And this wide, on all the alternatives, this wide piece is the shared use path. So it's a nice wide standard, not wider than average, but a standard class 1 facility. And we've got our roundabout. So here we flare, so it opens up to 3 lanes in both directions. So this will be 2 lanes coming through, and this one's a through and a right. And you'll see we've got the right lane separated so that pedestrians have a little refuge there. But they do cross 3 lanes of traffic on the exit. And it's the same for the approach in the other direction too. We've got the right turn lane. And then the 6-lane alternative, you still have your left lane. You have your throughs, and then your bus queue jump and your right turn lane with the shared use path. And the same here. We did look, because we're widening the roadway here, we did look at an option to add in a 4th leg of a crosswalk. But during the environmental analysis, we'll need to determine if that is viable or warranted from a pedestrian crossing standpoint. And then this here is the Rio Del Mar intersection. And here you can see the pink dashed line is the future improvements done by others, part of another development project happening in the city of American Canyon. This fourth leg would cut off right about here, right at the yield line on the future extension lane. We're just showing that in black so we could show what the extent of those impacts would be, but it would that would be constructed by others as well. And the 3-lane, same thing. We just have the same proposed number of lanes, so this leg would not change from alternative 1 to alternative 3. Eucalyptus, same shown here. We've got a future extension by others that would be a future project happening, which is not part of this project. And again, the roundabout would and the project construction would end at the yield line at the top of the screen here, and the future project would be required to construct the rest of the improvements. And Eucalyptus roundabout again extends to 3 lanes. And the 6th lane, we're providing the Q jump here for Eucalyptus Drive. This would have a Q jump once the 4-lane went in. Napa Junction Road. This is again the end, the last intersection of the project. And so we are going from existing conditions on both or on all 3 alternatives and transitioning to the project condition once we get through the intersection, adding the bus Q jumps, adding in the enhanced crosswalks, and then adding in the class 1 lanes on both sides. The roundabout would also be 3 lanes. And then lastly, all 3 alternatives would have a pedestrian undercrossing. And so essentially we would, the sidewalk or the class 1 path or shared use path would start dropping down underneath SR 29 and then go under SR 29 and back around to provide a grade separated crossing of that intersection. Looking at some of the costs. So again, the costs are preliminary and will be refined as more detailed designs are completed. So alternative 1, we have a range of values. Alternative 2, another range of values. So that is the alternative 1 is roughly or 41.7 million to 54.4 million. Alternative 2, 61.1 million to 78.1 million. Alternative 3, 46.8 million to 61.1 million. And then no construction funding has been identified yet. The other costs to be incurred are amenities. So any street furniture, enhanced roadway lighting, like decorative poles would add costs, environmental mitigation costs, overall long-term maintenance costs. Overall costs are subject to increase with inflation, but also the construction cost index have been fluctuating pretty significantly here. So that is a potential future cost, utility costs, and then user costs. So what I mean by user costs is there is a cost associated with collisions. That is a cost that, to respond with our emergency personnel, the cost to clean that work up, the cost to replace the damaged infrastructure. There's road user costs. So what is the time that you spend on the road? There's costs associated with emissions for greenhouse gases and things like that. So there are a lot of other user costs that are factored in to the overall life cycle cost of the project. So next steps, the process and the future timeline. So the project initiation phase, which is where we are now, is anticipated to be completed March of 2022. Then it will go to the preliminary engineering and environmental document phase. That is anticipated, if funding is identified and allocated, as Kate discussed earlier, could be done in spring of 23, but may be delayed based on funding. And in this phase, that is when further evaluation and studies will be conducted for these 3 alternatives. Then a draft environmental document will be circulated to the public. That'll be a 30-day public circulation period where all of the information will be provided as to what the analysis showed. They'll provide a detailed benefit cost analysis, all of that. Then once that has circulated, it will go to it will also produce a draft project report in concert with the draft environmental document, which is the engineering version of an engineering analysis of all 3 alternatives. And then the final environmental document and project report will recommend a design alternative to move forward into the final design phases, which is funding dependent along timing. That's where the detailed engineering design is done. Full right-of-way is identified and acquired, and then construction, which again is funding dependent. And we, the entire process, we are looking to identify and obtain funding. So we want to hear from you. We want to learn more and have you provide your comments. Comments will close on October 31st. You can visit the project webpage to get more information and also to access our social pinpoint interactive map, which is a great place for you to put specific comments. And I am going to pop that open really quick and show you where that is. So there will be a link on the project page, which don't worry, that website will come back up again. You can jot that down. It'll also be placed in the chat. But we have this interactive map that you click on. You just hit get started. These are the welcome and instructions. And then you can also use Google Translate to translate this into any language that you need. Here on the left-hand bar, there are some project information and project facts. So you can look at the purpose and need, look at the CMCP that this was built on, and then it includes the images and details that I presented today on all 3 alternatives. And it also provides a description of what the intersections are being that are being modified. But if you click on these here, that shows the exhibits that I showed today. So you can take a look at each one of those. And then these color-coded alignments, you can see on the side, we've tried to color code everything. So you'll see we've got if you click here, you can see the alignment again. And then we encourage you to put in your comments on, you just simply drag, drop, and you can type your comment here. We ask that you do put in your email address so we can respond to you and make sure that we capture your comment. If you have something that you want to attach, that is an option here as well. And with that, I will turn it back over to Stacy to moderate the question and answer period.
Perfect. Thank you, Lindsay. And thank you to both Jason and Kate for sharing more and welcoming every one of our attendees this evening. So we will get started, and you'll see a screen appear in just a moment to set up some ground rules here as we go through our question and comment session. We're going to endeavor to take and respond to all of your questions this evening. And just a reminder that our session has been recorded. So please be respectful. We strive to maintain a welcoming space for all attendees. And if you joined us late, Please know that any inappropriate language or inappropriate cultural references will be considered cause for dismissal from the session. But you are invited to ask your questions and share comments, either typed or spoken. So the panel will be responding to questions that you type in the Q&A, and I'll be calling on those of you who would like to use the raise hand feature to indicate you'd like to speak. So we do welcome questions and comments in languages other than English, and our commitment will be to follow up with a response within a week of tonight's project update. So before we begin, I want to take a moment to introduce our panel. I'll ask our panel to be prepared to unmute themselves and go ahead and share your webcam at this time. From NVTA, you'll hear from either Kate Miller, Danielle Schmitz, Sanjay Mishra, and Alberto Esquita. And from the City of American Canyon, I believe Erica Amon Smithies is joining, as Jason has quickly departed, but we appreciate his attendance this evening. And then, as you have likely observed, Mayor and council members are present this evening to listen to questions and comments. So thank you, Mayor, and thank you, council, for joining this evening. And joining from Caltrans, Ricky Gao and Pedro Quintana, and from GHD, Lindsay Van Paris and Todd Tregenza. So as you ask your questions this evening, we encourage you to let us know who you would like to respond. If you have joined us again using the Zoom webinar feature, so you can participate this evening using the Q&A feature or the raised hand feature. If you'd like to type your question and comment to us, you want to continue to use that Q&A feature. But if you'd rather speak in your own voice and share your comment or your questions, you'll want to use that raised hand feature to join our speaker queue. And while the team responds to questions, we'll be sharing some slides on your screen that will instruct you on how to use that Zoom webinar platform feature to ask your questions or share your comments. And we will make sure that we include those instructions on the screen. So what you're seeing here again is a quick review of the Q&A feature to type. Again, you'll want to find that Q&A icon. It looks like two double conversation bubbles at the top or bottom of your screen, and you can type your question or comment and select send. And the panelists will again be available to answer questions there in the Q&A feature. So you'll want to select to send them to everyone, and we can publish those for all to see. And then if you'd like to speak in your own voice this evening, we certainly encourage and welcome that. So we'll take a moment to go over the raised hand feature. Take a moment to find the raised hand on the top or bottom of your screen, depending on how you've joined us, and you can join the speaker queue. We will ask you to check your audio settings. Just look for the audio setting at the top or bottom of your screen and select device settings. When you're called upon to speak, we will ask you if you have your line muted to unmute your line. And then you'll have 2 minutes to state your name, your affiliation or organization, and question or comment. And we do have an image that will appear on the screen that will guide you through the time remaining on our speaker clock. So after you speak, all you'll need to do is click that hand once more to lower your hand. And just a reminder, your line is going to stay open while we have those respond so that you can ask one follow-up question for clarification. And we'll ask that you keep that brief so that we can get to other speakers this evening. And if you've joined us on audio conference, if you're listening in, you can indicate that you'd like to raise your hand by pressing *9 this evening. So we'll go ahead and get started. And I do see that we have about 18 attendees that stayed on the line, and I have one attendee with a hand raised. And our first attendee that wishes to speak is Carlotta. So Carlotta, I'm going to open your line, and when you're ready, you may come off mute and ask your question or share your comment.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. This is Carlotta Sainado, Program Manager with the Napa County Bicycle Coalition. So thank you for everyone who presented and for everyone who's here on the panel. I really appreciate the opportunity to give a comment. We're very happy to see that there's very serious consideration going towards Highway 29 through American Canyon through our Safe Routes to School walk audits that we did at all of the public schools in American Canyon, where we talked with students, staff, and parents. Highway 29 was probably one of, if not the top barrier to students walking and biking to school. So we're really glad to see multimodal access improvements suggested. I do want to emphasize that east-west connections are just as important as north-south, possibly more, maybe, I don't know, at least as important. Students feel like that's the barrier that prevents them from walking and biking to school. So we're really looking forward to future opportunities to provide some information from our Safe Routes to School walk audits, and provide input on the safety, accessibility, and comfort of the facilities that are being suggested in the alternatives, because it's not just meeting the safety standards, but it has to be comfortable to use. Otherwise, people still will want to drive. And yeah, we're looking forward to having more conversations about this. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Carlotta. I didn't hear any questions from you this evening, but we certainly appreciate your comments. I just wanted to confirm if you had any questions for our panel.
Thank you. No questions, just a comment.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Stacy, if I may just add one particular kind of piece to that. Level of traffic stress is definitely one of the parameters that we're using to evaluate the alternatives and to weight them in the analysis criteria. So if you build it, they will come, doesn't work if you build it and it is high stress. And we want to, again, make it comfortable for all users and all abilities. And so, yes, that is a big consideration in the alternative analysis. And so I appreciate your comment and thank you for being here tonight, but I did want to mention that is something that we are taking into consideration.
Thank you, Lindsay. And I see that she's responded back. I think we've closed her line, but she appreciates your response this evening. I don't see anyone else with their hand raised, but while we wait for other questions to come in, just a reminder, if you do have questions after this evening's event, you may contact Sanjay Mishra or Danielle Schmitz at NVTA. And Sanjay can be reached at 707-259-8631, or Danielle, her phone number is 707-259-5968. And for more information, we have included on your screen the NVTA project page for the SR29 improvements through American Canyon. And I'll read that address for those of you who are listening: www.nvta.gov/SR29AMCAN. And I do see that we have an additional hand up. Chris would like to speak. So Chris, you are the next speaker in my line. You can come off mute and you have 2 minutes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi there. Yes.
Yeah,
go
great.
ahead.
So I've typed some questions in the box, but I thought I'd ask them in person because you always. Anyway, so my name's Chris James. I live in American Canyon. I'm just representing myself. I'm kind of curious about the various alternatives, and I think it was covered at the beginning, but it went by so quickly. So do all alternatives include sidewalks and bike paths the full length? So I think it was for the first one, but I kind of got lost as we went through the other alternatives. And then in addition to that, is alternative number 3. Is that similar to what the city was proposing with the Broadway specific plan, where they were going to add a 3rd lane and reduce speed limits? And with regard to speed limits, when we are going to reduce the lanes, the widths on anyway, it looks like, are we going to reduce the speed on that road anyway from 55 to lower? So I guess there's 3 questions there, and a comment as well about the cross traffic for pedestrian traffic. I'm very concerned that roundabouts, the cars will not give way. I know legally they have to, but I would be very concerned about kids. That a lot of children will be crossing that road to go to school. So there's a lot of traffic coming across the city because schools are on both sides. People live on both sides. I'm concerned about pedestrian access and the fairness for the crossing. So with the crosswalk, with the lights, that would be preferred. But again, I guess I've rambled enough, but I'll hopefully get those 3 things covered tonight, 3 or 4 things covered. Thanks.
Very good. Thanks, Chris. I think I heard 3 questions in there. I heard which alternatives include the sidewalks and bike paths. So I'll ask Lindsay in just a moment to reshare some of those alternative features for us. And she's got the ability to pull her screen back up if she needs to go through that. And then on alternative 3, it seemed your question revolved around whether it was a similar plan to involve a 3rd lane and potential for speed limits. And do we anticipate a reduction in speed from 55 miles an hour? So we'll go ahead and flip to Lindsay. Lindsay, I'll let you field that first one. If you can walk through those alternatives and remind us which ones would include sidewalk and bike path improvements.
Sure. Yes, all 3 intersections, or all 3 alternatives, do include bike lanes along SR 29 on both sides throughout the entire corridor, and also Class 1 shared use paths. And the reason for that is some cyclists, you're more experienced and comfortable with traffic cyclists, will opt to stay on the lane and stay at speed. And then others who are not as comfortable being that close to traffic will opt to use the shared use path. So yes, to answer that question, all 3 alternatives will have the same width bike lane and the same shared use path. The only difference with the roundabout alternative is that we will be buffering at the intersections. The side or the shared use path will be buffered with either landscaping or hardscaping from the circulating roadway per roundabout design standards. And then to address your question on alternative 3, I will turn it over to either Erica or NVTA to address the consistency with the Broadway specific plan. But the intent of that is to reduce the lanes, to add in that more city street than highway street feel. It'll remain, State Route 29, but yeah, the intent is to reduce speed to improve safety. And then your 3rd question, I'd like to come back to, but first, I'd like to have the opportunity to respond to that one for the cross traffic and peds. But
and with the speed, maybe are the other ones going to reduce the speed as well, or would they stay at 55 or even go up?
No, all 3 intersection or all 3 alternatives, the goal would be to reduce speeds.
Great.
And particularly with the, with the signals, if the speed was reduced to 45, 35, what that determination has been made, or that has not been determined at this point. But if it were to be reduced to 45, if all lights were green, someone could go through the whole corridor at 45. But with the roundabouts, they will be designed to have what we call a fastest path, which means if you ignore the striping, you can zip through at 30 miles an hour. So that would provide further speed reduction through the geometry. So through the way that we design the road, cars will have to kind of weave to get in and get around the roundabout. And then
Lindsay, let us take a stab at the question regarding the Broadway specific plan. The 6-lane corridor concept came out of the Gateway study. And so it was incorporated as part of the Broadway specific plan because that was the one thing that was on the table. So things, as you can see, are starting to shift a little bit towards improvements that probably can be funded, that would be approved by both the Caltrans and the Regional Planning Agency, as well as conform to funding opportunities. And whatever is carried forward in this effort will eventually be changed in the Broadway specific plan. So this is really a plan. This plan is driving the highway improvements, and the Broadway specific plan is really focused on how the downtown improvements will move forward. And it does have a highway element, but again, it would be whatever is decided here would be incorporated in that plan. And Erica, if you wanted to speak a little bit more about that, you can.
I think you've covered it quite well, Kate, between you and Lindsay. Thank you.
And the one thing that I would also say is I know the concern about the east-west movement for pedestrian is a real concern, and we understand that completely. Some of the proposals, specifically the roundabout proposal, probably addresses that the best. It allows for much shorter and more and has more pedestrian refuges than the other two proposals. And it would significantly improve the safety crossing east and west. And plus, there is one pedestrian overpass being proposed. But yeah, we recognize this as being an issue. And I think one way that you can kind of visualize how the roundabouts might work is to look at the First Street and Second Street roundabouts like California. Bicyclists can actually navigate pretty easily in the roadway itself because the traffic is moving pretty slow. But the other crossings are quite small and provide a lot of places for pedestrians to be safe and to seek refuge from the automobiles.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kate. That actually transitions perfectly to the point that I wanted to make regarding, the pedestrians and roundabouts and cyclists and roundabouts, and the concern. Anytime I do a roundabout project, I hear a lot about the concern for pedestrians and particularly school-age children. We have prepared videos for children on the rules, the roundabout rules and the rules of the road, and have comics and all those things to help with that education component. But really, the benefit with the roundabout is they are separated. So again, they're only crossing one movement at a time, but they're also pulled further back from the intersection. So at a signalized intersection, your crosswalk and your traffic signal are all right there. And how many times have we been looking to the left to see where our conflict is and wanting to make a right on red and then look to the right and there's a pedestrian or a bicyclist right there. It is a scary feeling that I've experienced. With a roundabout, that is eliminated because the intersection or the crosswalk is pulled back from the intersection. And you only have to, the driver focuses on one conflict at a time. So the driver does not have to determine if there is a conflict with pedestrians, bikes, and vehicles all at the same point. The bikes are brought in. If a cyclist is exiting the bike lane, they're brought in before the pedestrian crossing. So then that's one potential conflict point. Then they approach the crosswalk and only have to look for pedestrians, and then there's a space, a refuge space for them to cross into and then be able to determine and analyze if the cars are, if there's a gap in circulating traffic to get through. Drivers actually yielding with the rectangular rapid flashing beacon, no matter what positive control, because they are multi-lane, we would recommend either a beacon, which is just that wig-wag flash, and the sign, the lit sign that lets cars know that a pedestrian is there. They push the button and they want to cross, or an actuated pedestrian signal. Those have to meet traffic signal warrants, which I'm getting very technical, but if you don't have the volume of pedestrians that you need in order to meet that, then we cannot get that installation approved, which is why we had both options on there for potential options to consider. And then just some statistics in general. It is typical intersection speeds are 40 miles an hour and higher. A pedestrian's chance of death if hit by a motor vehicle at that speed is greater than 30%, where the roundabout speed is considerably slower than 40. 30 is a fast path, and the chance of pedestrians, the chance the pedestrian chance of death if hit by a motor vehicle is significantly reduced to about 5%. And studies have shown a almost 60% reduction in pedestrian collisions and a 6% reduction in bicycle collisions with roundabouts compared to similar sized intersections. That was a
Great.
lot.
It was a lot, Lindsay, but it was certainly a lot of information and a lot of knowledge to share with our attendees tonight. And I believe we've addressed the questions that Chris had asked. And we did let him ask additional questions in the Q&A feature since he asked a follow-up question. So I'd like to continue to move through those who have their hands up, and I do see some folks on our side of the production tonight that have their hands up. I want to prioritize some folks on our attendee side. So I want to hear from Beth next. Beth, I've opened your line, and you'll have 2 minutes to unmute your line. Share your name and your affiliation if you have one, and share your question or your comment.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Beth Marcus, and I was on the SR 29 committee years ago at Napa, and then I was also on the one in American Canyon. My concern is, and I know we're talking about the roundabouts, and my concern is at the Rio Del Mar. This is going to be more of a important intersection now because Watson Ranch will be developed, and that will be an entryway. My concern is the crosswalk currently is on the left-hand side. If you're on Rio Del Mar turning left onto Highway 29, going toward Napa, the crosswalk is currently on the left-hand side going to the north, which is in a very bad spot. It should be on the right-hand side. And the reason why I say that is anyone who lives in American Canyon, and in the morning when you're trying to get out to go left north to Napa, the light is not very long. And when there is a pedestrian there, you have to wait, and it blocks. You get into the traffic, you're blocking. If the light turns, then you've got a backup on the highway in addition to Rio Del Mar. I don't know if I'm explaining that clearly enough or not. Plus the crosswalk is not very long. So most of the time the pedestrian doesn't have the entire time to get across the highway. And like I said, it's not a very big crosswalk, but because the light is so short, it creates a big problem. But on the good side is we have our chickens there, and that really helps our situation because people stop for them. So that is my main concern. If the roundabout does not go there, I would like to see that move to the south side.
Stacey,
Perfect. Thanks. Go ahead.
oh yeah, I was gonna say I can go ahead and just jump in.
Yeah,
to
so a
start
couple
that
of things.
Was that
Sure.
clear? I'm sorry, I might have been rambling on.
That's
No, that
okay,
was great.
Beth. We appreciate that. So you've shared a little bit with us about the crosswalk positioning and the signal timing. And although you didn't have a specific question, I think Lindsay has some information to share. Lindsay, I'll ask you to keep it brief because we do have a couple more people who would like to speak.
Yes, in general, the crosswalk is on the right-hand side at this location. Because of the left turn lane from SR 29 into Rio Del Mar, that's just one additional conflict and one additional lane to cross. So that would impact signal timing. But it is something that we can evaluate and look at, and it will be documented. So thank you for that question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Beth, for your comments. I'm going to go ahead and lower your hand and we'll hear from Tammy. So Tammy, you're the next person in our speaker queue. I'm going to open your line and you can unmute and ask your question or comment. You'll have 2 minutes.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to review your alternatives and to ask our questions. I'm very happy to see Vision Zero mentioned. It's something I've been reading up more about, and I'm glad to see it's spreading. I'm all for traffic safety. And that's one thing that I would love to see included in more detail when you rank these different alternatives is the safety factor. Since Vision Zero is all about reducing serious injuries and fatalities, it seems I'd like to see safety considered as a factor when you do your ratings and rankings in future presentations. Since you did mention that Napa has roundabouts recently implemented, my question is whether there has been any analysis done as far as safety now with the roundabouts, you know, fatalities, accidents, speeding incidents versus when there were no roundabouts, because that may give us some insight as to what we can expect in American Canyon with the alternative with the roundabouts. So if you have any information that, you know, shows before and after the roundabouts, I'd love it if you could share it with us now or provide it to me offline. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Tammy, for your comments regarding Vision Zero and safety. Certainly safety is paramount as we consider the project design going forward. So a couple of questions in there about data insights. Do we have that data, or will it be shared in future stages of the process and project approval? Do we have data from before and after when roundabouts have been installed in other communities? So Lindsay, I'll let you share what you can, and then if you'd like to pass off to any of our other panelists, you're free to do so.
Sounds great. Thank you, Stacy, and I will ask some of our other panelists to join in on this. But first and foremost, I have to say I apologize if that safety message got lost. That is always, as an engineer, that is our number one concern, and that is it. With my license, the testing and the things that all professional engineers have undergone is to protect the public and make sure that we're providing safe infrastructure. And so that is the number one priority. And so it should have been highlighted further, but that is taken into consideration, not only from just the general collision reduction potential and safety from all roadway users, but it also takes into consideration the long-term implications and the long-term impacts that safety deficiencies can potentially have on the project. And we will do a better job moving forward in making sure that is documented and presented in a more clear and precise fashion. But with regards to that, it definitely was considered, and it is part of our analysis in the intersection control evaluation, as well as our project study report. In regards to the Napa roundabouts, I just happen to have been very heavily involved in that project. And doing that analysis and that comparison now would not be fair because it was opened during the pandemic and during the initial pieces of the closure. And so having the before collision counts with tons more people on the road versus the after project counts or after project statistics, it just wouldn't be fair to provide that analysis because the volume of people out in their cars had reduced so much. But that is something that we do want to take into account. We do have Caltrans on the line today, and perhaps
Lindsay, can I just, this is
go ahead.
Danielle Schmitz with Napa Valley Transportation Authority. So to answer your question, Tammy, we don't have any specific post data from the California roundabouts anecdotally, but we do have a lot of data on roundabouts, and we can post some on that SR29 American Canyon website on the NVTA site about how roundabouts reduce collisions by 70%, or they reduce rear ends by over 90%. So we do have those case studies and that information. So we will put that on the website.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Tammy, for joining tonight. Thank you for your questions. Danielle, thanks for jumping in there. And I do see that a few of our representatives from American Canyon have joined us and have raised their hands. So I'm going to call on Mayor Garcia. Mayor Garcia, I see your hand raised. Would you like to come off mute and share
Yes,
with
thank
us?
you. Thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. I'm certainly encouraged by option 2 with the roundabouts. Seems if we can keep traffic moving, it will relieve congestion. I have a question. Because I heard Ms. Miller mention briefly a pedestrian overcrossing. See, that would be my concern at Donaldson Way and 29.
Sorry, it's an crossing, Mayor. My bad. I should, yeah.
Okay.
So,
Well, and I would say also, what about an overcrossing? You know, it's the heaviest used part for young people going to and from the middle school. I'm sure you're aware there's only one middle school, about 1,000 kids at that school. And everybody on the east side passes that way more conveniently, certainly with vehicle traffic as well. So I would like to have some analysis of it. I'm having a hard time trying to visualizing how a pedestrian gets through a roundabout intersection. If you had a video or something that you could demonstrate that with, I think that would be helpful. And I think probably I'm not alone in terms of trying to visualize how that would happen. But I appreciate your presentation. I would say, as a side note, I think for us as MBTA board, when it comes to transportation, we need to be looking also at our capacity and results with how many people are on transit and what we might do to increase that capacity as well. The housing situation north of us has gotten to the point where a lot of families are being displaced. The school system in Napa lost over 1,400 kids this past 2 years, and I expect in the next 2 years they'll lose an equal amount because the cost of housing is prohibitive for most young families. Those are my comments, and I thank you for your presentation again.
Thank you, Mayor Garcia. Sorry, Stacey, I stepped right in, but in the interest of time, I just wanted to respond to the PED overcrossing structure. We did look at that, Mayor, and eliminated it from consideration because of the height it would need to be in order to allow the design vehicles to go under it and provide that clearance distance required by federal regulations. We would require upwards of 200 feet of ramp in order to achieve accessible structure height, so ADA compliant structure height, and that would be going at the maximum 8% slope with the landings. So that would add significant cost and significant right-of-way impacts in order to provide that ramping and in the switchbacks. So it was dropped from consideration. Mayor, I see you're speaking, but you're muted.
Did you consider a spiral ramp? There's several in the area.
We have considered a spiral ramp as well, but again, just the distance to get up and over 29 versus the distance to get under, the clearance from a large STA, so the big haul trucks, is much greater than the clearance needed for a person on a bicycle or a pedestrian. And so we can shallow that up and have much shorter crossing or distance to drop than we have a distance to rise.
Thank you. I appreciate having more details on what that looks like, though. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Lindsay. We'll hear next from Vice Mayor Mark Joseph. Would you like to unmute and ask your question or share your comment?
Yes, well, again, I would echo everyone else. Thank you for the presentation. We've heard variations over the last few months and they keep getting better. So that's an encouraging sign. I have a couple of quick questions. First, would there be a need for any of the transit bus queue jumps in alternative 2 since it's a roundabout and there isn't really a stop sign? So that's my first question. The second question is, I'm assuming the cost of alternative 2, the roundabouts, is dependent to some extent on the number of roundabouts. For example, if we only did 3 roundabouts, it would cost, a lot less than if we did all 6. And then lastly, do we have any examples, nearby examples of 6-lane roundabouts? Because I'm I guess I have standard roundabout anxiety in general, and 6 lanes kind of worries me. So those are my 3 questions. My comment is the best east-west connector for pedestrians, of course, would be a grade separated crossing. And so I would throw that out as something to think about. Admittedly, a very expensive undertaking, but that would also improve that east-west connection, not to mention traffic flow. So again, and I appreciate your answers, and a lot of the comments and suggestions, I'll just go online and plug them in like everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. So again, 3 questions in there. Are bus queue jumps considered an alternative 2? Is the cost of alternative 2 dependent on the number of roundabouts that are designed and or constructed? And examples, are there any nearby of the 6-lane roundabouts? Lindsay, do you want to talk about bus queue jumps and alternative 2?
Yes, so the dedicated bus queue jump lanes were analyzed and were dropped from consideration based on the footprint and the feasibility. So a traditional bus queue jump is not included. However, the option to potentially have a restricted lane for bus use only during peak period times, like similar to the bus on shoulder. During peak times, the bus could utilize the shoulder. It would also allow for buses to only operate in 1 lane. In regards to and for alternative 2, there would be a bus queue jump lane at American Canyon, because that is still a signal in all alternatives. But the cost would be dependent on the number of roundabouts. One of the nuances of a roundabout corridor is that if you leave a signal in the middle of a roundabout corridor, it can deteriorate the operations. So we are looking at a full roundabout corridor, and then providing them at certain locations will allow restrictions for right in and right out using the paved median, which will help improve the safety from the lefts out across multiple lanes of traffic. But if you were to decide to go with 3, just to use your example, with 3 roundabouts, it would reduce the cost. And the potential in the next phase, the potential to look at phasing the project and not necessarily going in and constructing all of 29 in one big fell swoop, but doing bite-sized chunks would also be an option. As far as the example of 6-lane roundabouts nearby, the answer to that is unfortunately no. There are some that are in development and under construction, but there are 6 lanes. And saying 6 lanes, it's kind of a misnomer, because it's what we call a hybrid. So it is still 2 lanes in one direction with 3 in the other. There are a bunch all over the US that I can point you to. And when you brought that up, I did realize that I neglected to address the mayor's comment of a video on how to cross the roundabout. And yes, I can provide that to you. I don't have it to show you tonight, but I will track down that video on my server and send it over to you, or send it over to MBTA, who can make it available on the website.
Very good. Thanks again, Lindsay. And I don't see any other hands up from our attendees, but I do see that Councilmember Miriam Abu-Dabis has her hand up. So if you'd like to come off mute and share your question or your comment, Councilmember, you're welcome to do so.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you to all of you who presented. I think you did an amazing job. And a special thank you to Kate Miller for bringing to light the fact that capacity is no longer what's good for anything, actually. So my question is about funding. How optimistic are you that we will obtain funding for this? And once we have all the funding that we need, how long until build out?
So thank you for the question, Council Member. This is a little bit of a challenge, because some of the competitive programs are based on benefit cost ratios, and it often factors in the reduction in congestion, unfortunately. And since the volume on this highway isn't anywhere near some of the volumes in larger urban areas, it's sometimes difficult for us to draw funding to such a project. That said, things are changing. I'd like to see some of the influences that Caltrans is and efforts putting through the CAPTI starts influencing some of the Senate Bill 1 programs. But there is other opportunities. So certainly Regional Measure 3, if that flows, will certainly get us very far into the project development and at least move it to a shelf-ready state. And I think that there's an opportunity for us to change up our sales tax. Right now, Measure T can only be used for local streets and road rehabilitation, but we have an opportunity to do different things with it pending voter approval. That is to bring the funds forward by issuing debt against future revenues. That really kind of gives us more money, and we can pull money off the top for capital projects. And this, in our recent board retreat on September 13th, was a project that was very central, and the board recognized its importance. So I wish I had a crystal ball that could answer all the questions, but it is a huge priority project for us, and we would definitely be seeking competitive grant funds for it as soon as we can get the project shelf ready.
Thank you, Kate. And also, I know Vice Mayor Joseph said that we've had several different reiterations of this, and they just seem to keep getting better. I want to echo that and say that I genuinely feel like in this presentation, our constituents, our residents' concerns were addressed. So thank you for that as well.
You're welcome.
Stacy, there is a comment that I saw in the chat pod that I would like to address just with the group.
Sure, we'll go ahead and do that. And then I know we started a little bit late, so we appreciate everybody's extra time. Go ahead, Lindsay, and then we'll start with some closing comments.
Sounds great. So the comment that was posted in the Q&A, I think speaks to some of the other verbal comments that we heard regarding the concerns with just navigating the roundabouts and how that's done and how that affects the capacity. And so I'll just read the question really quick and then respond. So it says, while discussing option 2, it was mentioned that there would be changes to the speed limits on Highway 29. What would the new speed limit be? And then the second part of the question, which I want to focus on, is also what has been the experience, how long it takes for people to be able to efficiently use the roundabout, and was the fact that many non-locals use that route and go to Napa considered in the evaluation of the roundabout effectiveness? And the answer to that question is yes, it was in our traffic operational analysis. And Todd, feel free to jump in if you would like, but in our traffic operations analysis, particularly with the roundabouts, we have a factor that is called the environmental factor. And so we take into consideration the significant change that this will be on opening day and that it will take some time for people to get used to it. On average, we see about 6 months, which is why we tend to do our post analysis of operations 6 months or later after the project has been constructed. But we apply that, we provide a higher learning curve. And what that does is it means that people take longer to make the decision to either enter into the roundabout or cross the roundabout as they're getting used to it. And then in areas where we have a high population of non-local drivers, which we do in this corridor, we extend that even further in order to accommodate and account for that delayed response and reaction time, that delayed comfort level in going through the roundabout. So yes, that would be. And then the speed limit, well, not the speed limit, but the design speed for the intersections, if it was a roundabout alternative, would be 30 miles an hour. In between, that is still not been determined what that would be, but it is 30 miles an hour at the roundabout.
Very good. And thank you to Linda for sharing that question. Thanks, Lindsay, for taking an opportunity to respond. As we wrap up tonight, just very quickly, I have one person that is still on audio conference. So if you've dialed in, I'm going to give you one opportunity here to speak up. If you want to press *9 to indicate that you wish to speak, you may do so. And giving a moment. I don't see a response, so I'll go ahead and tell everyone, thank you, panel, for responding to these important questions today. You're welcome to go on mute as we finish up with some closing comments here this afternoon or evening now. We do want to thank those of you who attended and submitted questions and comments and participated this evening. And of course, you're invited to learn more and share your comments by October 31st. As a reminder, Lindsay had shared the social pinpoint link, and that can be accessed through the American Canyon Project webpage at nvta.gov/SR29AMCAN. And after tonight's event, if you do have any questions, you can certainly contact the NVTA representative, Sanjay Mishra, at 707-259-8631, Danielle Schmitz at 707-259-5968, or email at dschmitz@nvta.ca.gov. And again, for more information or for the link to the social pinpoint map where you can leave your comments or identify your concerns, that is located on the project webpage at nvta.ca.gov/SR29AMCAN. So that concludes today's event, and you're welcome to leave by clicking the red icon or red button that says leave. Thanks for joining and have a good evening. Good night.